Coming up on Mississippi Roads, we take a trip to the Delta as we visit Cathead, talk with guitar great Kingfish Ingram, and take a tour of Clarksdale with Bohemian Tours. All that coming up now on Mississippi Roads.
Down Mississippi Road, Mississippi Road.
Hi, welcome to Mississippi Roads. I'm your host, Walt Grayson. Now, if you're a fan of the blues, and also if you know anything about Mississippi, you know you can't explore Mississippi too deeply before you bump into the blues. And that's what we're doing with this show, a whole half hour of blues. And we're headquartering ourselves at the Blue Front Cafe in downtown Bentonia. Now, the Blue Front Cafe is said to be Mississippi's oldest surviving juke joint. It's owned and operated by blues artist Jimmy Duck Holmes. And if you're a blues fan, you probably recognize this setting. Now, in our first story, we're going to meet the world's biggest blues fan, I would imagine. And I say that because he gave up a good advertising job in Ohio, transplanted himself to Mississippi, and has put his marketing skills to work promoting the blues.
The very first blues record, the actual real blues album I ever bought, was Muddy Waters' Folk Singer. It had things on it like My Home is in the Delta, and literally singing about here. So it just all kept pushing back to here. In February of 1995, I was recruited for a job in St. Louis, Missouri. So I moved there for the big job, the one you move for. But I get to St. Louis, and being a longtime blues fan, it kind of suddenly occurs to me, wait a second, Mississippi's probably 5 hours away. So I remember when I first visited, my very first visit to Clarksdale, I went out and saw at that time what was left of Muddy Waters' home out at Stovall Plantation. I came down to do what I called the Dead Man Blues Tour. The idea being I just sort of walk where my heroes walked, walk where the music came from, just assuming that it was probably all gone. So it just became my regular long weekend vacation spot. But I kept visiting here and thinking, well, I should be doing this. This is a place that actually seems like it needs me. I can make a difference versus there, I'm just a cog in the machine. When I made this decision, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to drop out of this ridiculously high-paying job. But you also had to think about, okay, I got to make a living. And I also need a way that I can actually meet people on a regular basis. You don't want to be stuck in some little cubbyhole or office or whatever. So I came up with basically the store I always wanted to walk into, but could never find. And certainly Clarksdale did not have, and that's Cathead that we're standing in. Sort of like shopping in a well-lit juke joint. You can have folk art on the walls and blues art on the walls. You can have everything blues related, recordings, documentaries, things to read, t-shirts, of course, all that kind of stuff. But then it becomes this platform to work from so that you can start to book shows or create festivals or make documentaries or whatever. So we started Juke Joint Festival, and it's just built up to this beast. It really is stressful to even think about as much as I love it. And what that does is it creates business that weekend, but then it has sort of legs to it, where people start thinking about opening a business downtown, or people start thinking about moving here. So people ask all the time about sort of the fate of the blues and the health of the blues, and is it dying? So the genre is healthy. The culture that it came from, particularly in the South, particularly in Mississippi and the Delta, it's getting very, very thin in terms of being able to walk up to an old bluesman in his 80s and say, what was it like? How'd you grow up? There are still guys like a big George Brock. George loves to talk about his mule Ida, who he plowed with a mule. That's, it's not that distant of a past, I guess. And he'd sing to Ida to make her work harder. And he just swears, that mule would work harder if I sang to her. How can you tell that story if not in pictures?
You go to church, I go to too. You go to work, I tell you what I do. You get paid, I hold the money. I be right there, but take you, honey. You go, I'm going with you.
When I started trying to document Big George Brock, basically tried to formulate a comeback for him. Here's an old bluesman who had sort of disappeared into the sands of time, but was totally real deal and still at the top of his game in terms of his performance. And basically ended up with this cool little documentary called Hard Times. That's the first thing that I did for film festivals. Of course, now it's on DVD. After doing Hard Times, we just started talking about doing some bigger project. In fact, we'd call it The Project. So we'd be sitting at, a crazy hill country house party with moonshine and out-of-tune guitars, and something crazy happens and somebody starts a tire fire, and you're like, this is the project. And that's essentially what M for Mississippi is. It's a 7 consecutive day road trip through Mississippi, having those crazy experiences. And we followed that up with We Juke Up in Here, which essentially is a study of, okay, what's a juke joint and where are they now? What happened to them? So our newest project is called Moonshine and Mojo Hands, and we just tour folks around showing them crazy blues experiences, some historical things, and then some things that are just like barbecued raccoon at a blues yard party, that kind of thing. But it's the kind of stuff that, people really, they want that authentic blues experience, and it can still be had in Mississippi if people hurry up and get here. Well, yeah, and then Hidden History of Mississippi Blues. I know the History Press loves it. They'd read about some things I'd done, so they kind of knew about me. They did some research and thought, well, that seems to be the guy. So we want this book on Mississippi Blues, but we don't know what we want. What do my customers ask me about the most? So that's kind of how I broke it up. I was like, well, people ask about the origins of the blues, obviously you've got to have. But also things like the crossroads and all the stuff ties into that. Juke joints, what are these things, and etc. So I basically wrote chapters on things people ask me about the most. And then since I'd already been interviewing old bluesmen for the better part of 10 years, at that point for Blues Review magazine, I just took those interviews and re-edited them as chapters. So you have, T. Model Ford, Robert Belfour, these real storied characters that just have amazing backstories. I get customers who ask me, they'll say things like, well, you must really love the blues to have moved here. It's like, well, I do love the blues, and I did move here, but I could have kept visiting here if I was just going to come down and try to hear stuff. My thing is, I came here for the music, but it's the people that kind of made me want to stay. There's real Southern hospitality here for one thing, but also just all the stories and the characters. It's kind of like this culture with a voice. And I think that's what has just been so attractive to me, to be able to spend time with these guys. Or Robert Bilbo Walker, a guy who's 80 years old and wears a wig and a suit and dances with his guitar. The late T. Model Ford, a bluesman who made it to maybe 93 years old, was in here one day entertaining the ladies as he did. And I said, tell him where you're from, T. Model, because usually he said, I'm from Greenville, Mississippi, and like draws it out. Instead that day, without just, even pausing, he says, I'm from the United States of Mississippi, in that great drawl. But like I started thinking about that, and it's like, it really kind of is like that. Within the music and the art and the culture, it's like this little country. Back then, there were the signs when you came into Mississippi. Now it says birthplace of America's music, which is true and which is awesome. But I kind of like the old signs because it said Mississippi feels like coming home. And I'm not a Mississippian. I'm not even from the South, maybe Southern Ohio. But it always felt just like that to me. It felt like I was coming back to I'm supposed to be there. That's home.
The Blue Front Cafe in Bentonia is so significant to blues in Mississippi that it has its own Blues Trail marker right out front. Over the decades, a lot of musicians have come through here. Skip James, Sonny Boy Williamson, and of course, the owner, Jimmy Duck Holmes. Jimmy Holmes, by the way, has been here since 1948 when the place opened, and he's one of the last people to play the Bentonia-style blues. Now, in our next story, we're going to meet a young man who has already developed his own version of blues.
I was born in Clarksdale. Honestly, it's boring. Honestly, I'm just gonna tell the truth, man. It's boring, man. Like I said, it's a basic town that's just, but it's filled with a bunch of history. Being from here, of course, you're gonna have a love for music because, you know, this is a very historic town. So here, you know, when you're like 15 or 16, it's either play ball or do music, and as you can see what I chose music, you know. I think I was like 5. I was at home with my dad, and we're watching this PBS thing on Muddy Waters. And he was telling me about Muddy Waters and everything. And I didn't even know what blues was, honestly. You know, like I said, because around that time I was listening to gospel music and stuff, you know. We came here to the museum, and if you were from Clarksdale, you could come and do the museum for free.
They were like a big influence to him. So we came every day. In fact, we lived right behind the museum. We walked over. He took the lessons.
I remember when he first came around, I didn't realize it was him at first, but every time I was driving my car home from work, I would see this kid after school, always on his porch playing the guitar every day. I didn't put it together that was the same kid. He just showed up in class one day, and I just remember how hard he practiced and how serious he was. I knew he was gonna, you know, be something.
It went from 1 or 2 days of the week of just studying things to 7 days of the week, just studying music. I mean, you all obsessed with it. You was just sitting in front of the computer, just studying music.
You can tell when somebody goes home and they've practiced every day in between until the next time they come back to class, and you know, that's the kind of kid he was, practicing hard every day. So that's the one thing that nobody gets to see, you know. Nobody gets to see all the hours that you spend practicing on your instrument. They just get to see you for that couple of hours that you're on stage. They don't see the hundreds and thousands of hours and hard work that you put in.
Like, outside of music, honestly, man, I'm gonna tell the truth. I'm like a normal 18-year-old. Like, I wake up at 5 o'clock every day, you know, to get ready for school. And maybe like, when I wake up, 30 minutes is probably playing guitar or watching a video and trying to study that lick off that video, and then get ready for school, go to school, and think about music sometimes while I'm doing my work, and then come home, more guitar until I go to sleep.
When I saw him, when it got to the point he started doing this all the time, every day of the week, I knew it was something serious. I knew this was something that Chris Dunn wanted to do.
Around 6th grade, my parents got a divorce, and we became homeless, and we didn't have anywhere to go for like a couple of months, man. And
it took a lot out of Chris Dunn. It took a lot out of me. It was humiliating. We learned to deal with it. And I think that was the first time he started shutting down and just wouldn't talk anymore.
When I got to 6th grade, I started getting bullied. You know, if you notice, I'm not what the average 18-year-old should look like. And I started getting bullied on my appearance and everything. And so I was going through like a very depressing state.
He just, when he got to junior high and he started getting bullied and his music got better. And it seemed like he took the frustration out on the guitar.
People say young kids can't get the blues, but nah, that's not true. Cause I'm an example. I'm a prime example, man, that they can. I think the best blues are the songs that are just downright depressing. You know, that's all what songs are. Just stuff about life. You know, life is the greatest inspiration we can use when doing something like that, man. Yeah. Like going to see a band and just to see the excitement and the fun they're having on stage, and I've always wanted to have that feeling. So, you know, I'm doing it now.
The Blue Front Cafe in Bentonia became an international tourist attraction back in the 1970s. And I'm serious, people from all over the world are in here all of the time. So you need to make this one of your destinations when you do your blues tour of Mississippi, as well as this next location.
Delta and Bohemian are probably as oxymoronic as they are redundant, but we more or less started it to celebrate the diversity and the constancy in the Mississippi Delta. And we really wanted locals to realize that, you know, people come here from all over the world. They find this place and us fascinating. We're a story of characters. I started managing the Clark House and writing for the local paper at the same time. And had been managing the Clark House about 8 years. And I started connecting with tourists here, and they would come in there like, man, okay, we've got live blues now 365 days a year and at least one venue every night. And I'd tell them about Cathead. I'd tell them about our 2 blues museums, art gallery or 2. So kind of out of connecting with guests that came here that really wanted to understand more of what informed the blues, I just started giving tours, and it kind of just bloomed out of that into a viable business. I usually start at the Clark House here, which is the oldest building in town, give a little history of John Clark, the founding of Clarksdale, go through, this is known as the Historic or Tennessee Williams District, and I give a little background on Tennessee Williams and his time here. All right, we've just left the Clark House and we're heading next door to the Cutrer Mansion. John Clark's daughter, Blanche Cutrer, built this home with her husband, Jack Cutrer. They had lavish parties here. They had 5 house servants, a governess, a French chef, an Italian gardener. They were noted for having masked balls and parties, and W.C. Handy played in this home with a 9-piece orchestra. Just a grand home. Tennessee Williams had said that Blanche Cutrer was the only grand dame he ever knew. and it's rumored that Belle Reve, the ancestral home of Blanche DuBois and Streetcar Named Desire, was based on this home. We have a Tennessee Williams Festival here every October in the middle of the month, and they have porch plays on several of these big homes here that are all still single-family dwellings, and they'll have little vignettes of Tennessee Williams plays on the porch and put chairs out in the yard. Tennessee Williams' grandfather was a rector here for 16 years at the Episcopal Church that's still in use. Tennessee Williams, I believe, lived here from about 1917 to 1921 when he was a young boy. And here is a little bit of an evidence of a bit of the Renaissance you see going on in Clarksdale. It's so easy to come to Clarksdale or really any Delta town and look around and say, man, there's so many vacant buildings, is it dying? But right on this stretch, you've got the Hooker Hotel, the Squeeze Box, and Delta Digs, all three really cool overnight places to stay. Anyway, a man from Franklin, Tennessee owns them. The Hooker Hotel is just named for his favorite musician, John Lee Hooker, but of course, that caused a stink in the Bible Belt a little bit. And then on the right over here is the Rock and Blues Museum, and that's owned by a man named Theo Dasbach from the Netherlands, and it's his collection of blues as it segues into rock and roll. Next door is Hambone Gallery. Stan Street, I think, is originally from New York. He's got an art gallery in here, fantastic painter. He plays harmonica and drums all over the world, and this is where we have live music on Tuesday night. For a town of, you know, under 17,000 people in the birthplace of the blues, is that every night of the year we've got live music in at least one venue.
Thank you. What's up, Marilyn?
Hey, y'all.
Delta here is pretty much the main drag. And I usually take folks in Roger Stoley's on most of my tours, and just let them get a feel for a really cool, eclectic blues and folk art store. I'm assuming y'all been in Ground Zero before. And then the most iconic, coolest blues club in America right here on the corner, Red's Lounge. Red's a good friend of mine, and like I always tell folks on tours, tell Red you're a friend of Billy's and he'll promise not to cut you as deeply. And we're pretty sure it's stick. And then a seriously iconic spot's up here in the bend of the road on the right. It's the Riverside Hotel. It was African-American hospital until 1944 when it turned into a hotel, mostly for itinerant bluesmen. Several famous bluesmen lived in here: Sonny Boy Williamson, Robert Nighthawk, Ike Turner. JFK Jr. stayed here in the early 90s. Bessie Smith, considered the Empress of the Blues, had a car wreck outside of Clarksdale in 1937. They brought her here to the hospital. She died in here in an upstairs room, and they've kept the room the same as when it opened, or when she died. One of the greatest assets we've got in Clarksdale is on the left up here. It's Quapaw Canoe Company. And John Rusky owns it. He's originally from Colorado. They make all their handmade stripper canoes here that they take out on the big river. And he gives anywhere from half-a-day trips up to very long trips on the Mississippi River. The whole area was built on cotton. I mean, Comer County supposedly had more cotton grown per capita than any county in the continental United States back in the day. And the levee's up here on the left. We're fixing to jump up on it. And the levee is built primarily pre-mechanization with wheelbarrows, shovels. They had dredges on the riverside. It's an incredible feat. It's mostly all soil. It doesn't have riffraff or anything underneath. But you can see this is a great road. And I mean, this runs from St. Louis to Baton Rouge, longer than the Great Wall of China. We're blessed here to have people from all over the world coming in on a daily basis, and how neat to be able, anybody in any one region, it's so easy to become insular or myopic, but to have folks from all over the world come to this place, fascinated by it for whatever reason, and to be able to see ourselves through their lens is incredible.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. But before we get away from here, I want to thank my buddy Jimmy Duck Holmes for letting us come to your Blue Front Cafe in Bentonia and remind you of what a gentleman this man is, and also what a great ambassador for the state of Mississippi he is to all these international visitors that come in here all the time. Meanwhile, if you would like any information about anything you've seen on the show, contact us at mpbonline.org/Mississippi Roads, and make sure you like our Mississippi Public Broadcasting Facebook page. Till next time, I'm Walt Grayson. I'll be seeing you on Mississippi Roads. How about a little traveling music?
So long, I hate to see you go. I said so long, I hate to see you go. I hope I'll see you somewhere on the road.
Mississippi Roads is made possible in part by the generous support of viewers like you. Thank you.